Get off my property before I call the cops! The woman screamed those words right in my face, spit flying, finger jabbing toward the small wooden sign I'd just installed on my own land. Her rage made no sense. This was my property, documented and legal. But Deirdre Hastings, HOA President Extraordinaire, didn't care about facts. Within an hour, police cruisers filled my driveway. Within a day, I was accused of stalking children. Within a week, I'd learned she'd forged documents to steal my land on paper. Ever battled a power-drunk HOA? Drop a comment, you need to hear what happened next. 3 months earlier, my life looked nothing like the legal nightmare it would become. I sat on my front porch every morning, with coffee and camera equipment scattered around my feet, watching golden light filter through the old oak trees. The trail running along the eastern edge of my land had become my favorite subject for landscape photography. Morning mist deer, occasionally wandering through the kind of natural beauty that made leaving the city worthwhile. I'd bought the land 3 years ago specifically because it sat just outside the HOA boundaries, a detail I'd verified 3 times with my real estate attorney before signing anything. The survey map was crystal clear. This was mine, all mine, and nobody could tell me what color to paint my porch or how tall my grass could grow. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when I noticed candy wrappers scattered across the trail. Just a few pieces of colorful foil catching the sunlight, nothing dramatic. I picked them up, tossed them in my trash bin, and thought nothing of it. But by Thursday, there were soda cans. By Saturday, a small pile of fast food bags and beer bottles had appeared near the property line. I spent an hour cleaning it up, annoyed but not yet concerned. People get careless sometimes. Kids cut through on their way home from school. It happened. What bothered me more was the pattern. The trash appeared overnight, always in roughly the same spot, like someone was using my trail as their personal dumping ground. The photographer in me noticed details others might miss. The beer bottles were the same brand each time. The footprints in the soft dirt showed at least 3 or 4 different shoe treads, all in larger sizes. Teenagers, probably. That Thursday evening, I heard them for the first time. Loud laughter echoed through the trees around 8 o'clock, followed by music thumping from a portable speaker. I stepped out onto my porch and listened, trying to gauge how close they were. The voices sounded young, probably high school age, and they were definitely on my property. I grabbed a flashlight and walked down toward the trail, but by the time I got there, they'd vanished. Only fresh beer cans remained still cold to the touch and a fresh cigarette butt smoldering in the dirt. I kicked dirt over it and headed back to the house frustrated. The next morning, I found more trash this time, including a broken glass bottle that could have seriously injured someone walking barefoot or a dog running loose. That was it. That was the moment I decided to put up a sign. I wasn't trying to start a war. I just wanted basic respect for private property. I drove to the hardware store that afternoon and bought a simple wooden sign, blank and black paint. Back home in my studio, I carefully painted the words in clean, professional lettering. Private property, no trespassing, please respect. Nothing aggressive, nothing threatening, just a polite reminder that this wasn't public land. I'd learned long ago that good photography required patience and attention to detail, and I applied the same philosophy here. I researched local property laws, confirmed I had every legal right to post signage on my own land, and even checked the exact position of my property line using the survey map I kept in my files. Everything is in order. My conscience is clear. While I was at it, I made one more decision that would prove crucial later. I mounted a small trail camera on one of the oak trees overlooking the area where the trash kept appearing. It was the same type of camera I used for wildlife photography, motion-activated decent resolution timestamp on every image. I positioned it carefully to capture the trail without pointing toward any neighboring homes, staying well within privacy laws. The camera was small enough that you wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it nestled among the branches about 8 feet off the ground. I tested it twice, checking the angle and making sure the motion sensor worked properly. Professional habits die hard. In photography, you always check your equipment twice. I synced it to cloud storage on my phone so every photo and video would automatically back up, just in case. Saturday afternoon, I set the sign in place, sun on my shoulders and the scent of wet earth rising as I tamped it into the soil. Clean lines, solid footing, clear message, a simple act that felt quietly satisfying. My property, my rules, my right to protect it. Simple as that. I gathered my tools and headed back toward the house, ready to pour myself a beer and call it a productive day. As I walked up the porch steps, I happened to glance back toward the street. That's when I saw her. Deirdre Hastings stood on the other side of the split-rail fence that marked the property line, arms crossed over her chest, staring at my new sign like I'd just planted a Confederate flag. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the anger in her posture, shoulders tight, chin lifted, that particular stance of someone who's decided they've been personally insulted. We'd never spoken directly, though. I'd seen her around the neighborhood plenty of times. Always perfectly dressed, always wearing more makeup than seemed necessary for a Tuesday morning, always walking her tiny dog with an expression that suggested the world had disappointed her yet again. I'd heard from other neighbors that she ran the HOA with an iron fist, and she clearly hated that I lived just beyond her HOA reach. Now, she was paying attention to me, and the look on her face promised nothing good. She stood there for nearly a minute, just staring, before turning sharply and walking back toward her house. I watched her go, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. My trail camera blinked its little red LED, once recording her presence. I didn't know it yet, but that moment, her standing there radiating fury at a simple property sign, was the beginning of everything that followed. Sunday evening arrived quiet and unremarkable. I'd spent most of the day editing photos from a wedding shoot the previous weekend, hunched over my computer in the small studio I'd set up in the spare bedroom. The work required total concentration, adjusting exposure, correcting color balance, and removing unwanted elements from backgrounds. By 8 o'clock, my eyes burned from staring at the screen, and I decided to call it a night. I saved my progress, stretched the kinks out of my back, and headed to the kitchen to make dinner. That's when I heard it. Loud laughter, sharp and mocking, echoing from the direction of the trail. Then came the unmistakable sound of metal clanging against wood, followed by more laughter and what sounded like spray paint rattling in a can. I didn't think so. I just reacted. I grabbed my phone and headed for the front door, already feeling my jaw tighten with frustration. The sun had set maybe 20 minutes earlier, leaving that purple-gray twilight that makes everything slightly harder to see. As I stepped off the porch, I could make out shapes moving near my sign. 4 of them teenagers by the look of it, clustered around the wooden post I'd installed yesterday. One of them kicked an empty beer can that went sailing into the trees with a metallic clatter. Another held what was definitely a spray paint can, shaking it up and down with that distinctive rattle. A third stood off to the side, recording everything on his phone, the screen's glow lighting up his face. The fourth, the biggest one, saw me coming and nudged his friends, pointing in my direction with a grin that said he wasn't even slightly worried about getting caught. I approached calmly, keeping my voice level and firm. "Hey, you guys need to leave. This is private property." The words came out more steady than I felt. My heart was pounding, but years of dealing with difficult clients had taught me how to project confidence, even when I didn't feel it. The big kid, probably 17, muscular in that high school athlete way, turned to face me fully, crossing his arms over his chest in a pose that clearly mimicked someone older, maybe his father, maybe someone he'd seen on TV. Either way, the gesture was designed to intimidate. "Old man says what?" He laughed at his own joke and his friends joined in. "This is public land, dude. We can be here if we want." His confidence wasn't just teenage bravado. It was something deeper, more certain, like he genuinely believed what he was saying. I took a breath and tried again. "No, it's not. This is my property. I have the deed and survey map to prove it. You need to leave now or I'm calling the police." That's when I noticed the damage they had already done. My sign, the one I'd carefully painted and installed less than 24 hours ago, was covered in spray-painted graffiti. Crude drawings, vulgar words, the kind of stuff teenage boys think is hilarious. The wood was scratched where someone had taken a key or knife to it. Beer cans littered the ground around the post, and I could see fresh footprints in the dirt where they had been stomping around. The kid with the phone kept recording, sweeping his camera back and forth between me and his friends, like he was directing some kind of reality show. "You guys seeing this?" he said to his phone. "Crazy old dude trying to tell us we can't walk on public property. This is harassment straight up." The one who had been doing the spray painting, a thin kid with bleached hair, stepped forward, still holding the can. "You can't tell us what to do, old man. You know who you're messing with." He gestured toward the big kid with his thumb. "That's Quinn. His mom runs the whole HOA around here. She's gonna make your life hell if you keep this up." Quinn. The name clicked into place immediately. Deirdre Hastings' son. Of course. The resemblance was there now that I looked for it. Same sharp chin, same entitled expression, same way of standing like the world owed him something. The kid with the phone shorter and stockier laughed. Yeah, my boy's mom is gonna destroy you, bro. She doesn't let anybody disrespect her like this. I felt my anger rising but kept it locked down. Losing my temper wouldn't help. Instead, I pulled out my phone and held it up. I'm documenting this. You're vandalizing my property and I'm taking photos as evidence. That got a reaction. Quinn's confidence flickered for just a second, replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness, but it passed quickly, covered over with more bravado. You can't take pictures of us, pervert, we're minors. That's illegal. The kid with the phone pointed at me accusingly. Yeah, that's mad creepy, dude. Taking pictures of kids, that's some pedophile shit right there. I ignored the accusation, stupid as it was, and started photographing anyway. The graffiti on my sign, the beer cans scattered around, the spray paint can still be in the bleached kid's hand. And yes, their faces. Clear shots showing exactly who was here and what they were doing. The law was on my side here. They were committing vandalism on my property, and I had every right to document it. The camera on my phone wasn't quite as good as my professional equipment, but it was good enough. The images were clear, properly exposed, even in the fading light, timestamps embedded in the metadata. Quinn's face darkened as I kept photographing. Yo, I said stop. He took a step toward me, and for a moment I thought he might actually try to grab my phone, but he stopped himself, probably realizing that would only make things worse. Instead, he pointed at me with one thick finger, the gesture aggressive and theatrical. My mom is Deirdre Hastings. You know who that is? She runs this whole neighborhood, and she's gonna destroy you for this. She's gonna make you wish you never moved here. His voice had gone high and tight with anger. The other kids started backing away, sensing that things were escalating beyond their comfort level. The one with the phone kept recording, but took a few steps back. The bleached kid dropped his spray paint can and shoved his hands in his pockets. Only Quinn held his ground, still pointing at me like his finger was a weapon. I kept my voice calm and measured. Your mom has no authority over this property. It's not part of the HOA. Now leave, or I'm calling the police right now. That finally did it. Quinn spat on the ground near my feet, not quite at me, but close enough to be insulting, and turned to his friends. Come on, let's get out of here. This creep isn't worth it. They walked away slowly, deliberately, taking their time to show they weren't scared. Quinn looked back over his shoulder once and called out, You're done, old man. You have no idea what's coming. Their laughter echoed through the trees as they disappeared into the darkness, heading back toward the street. I stood there for a long moment, listening to make sure they were really gone. My hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline finally catching up with me now that the confrontation was over. Back inside the house, I immediately checked my trail camera footage on my phone. The app showed several new videos motion-activated over the past 20 minutes. I scrolled through them, watching the teenagers arrive, watching them vandalize my sign, watching the whole confrontation play out from a different angle. The camera had captured everything, faces clearly visible, actions clearly documented audio, reasonably clear despite the distance. The timestamp in the corner of each video was precise and unambiguous. This was evidence solid and irrefutable. I saved the footage in several places, a habit born of too many data crashes. Old instincts told me never to rely on luck. Then I called the non-emergency police line and filed a report. The dispatcher took down all the information description of the teens, the vandalism, the threats. She assured me an officer would be in touch within 24 hours and advised me to keep any evidence I had. We've been getting more calls about teens causing trouble in that area, she said. It helps to have good documentation like photos or videos. I thanked her and hung up feeling slightly better. At least I'd done things right. Every step backed by proof. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that Quinn had already called his mother. And Deirdre Hastings was already planning her next move. Monday morning hit me like a freight train. I'd barely finished my first cup of coffee when I heard the pounding on my front door. Not a polite knock, but the kind of aggressive hammering that makes your heart jump into your throat. Police, open up! The voice was loud, authoritative, and deeply unsettling at 7 in the morning. I set down my mug and walked to the door, trying to make sense of what was happening. Through the window, I could see 2 patrol cars in my driveway, lights flashing but no sirens. 2 officers stood on my porch, one with his hand still raised to knock again. I opened the door and immediately recognized one of them, the same officer I'd spoken with on the phone last night when I filed my vandalism report. The other cop was older, harder looking, with the kind of expression that said he had already decided I was guilty of something. The older officer spoke first, his tone clipped and professional, but with an edge of hostility underneath. "Miles Redman." I nodded. "We need to talk to you about a complaint we received. May we come in?" It wasn't really a question. I stepped aside and let them enter my mind, racing through possibilities. Had the kids done something else overnight? Had they come back and caused more damage? The younger officer, the one I'd spoken with before, caught my eye and gave a slight shake of his head like he was trying to tell me something, without words. The older cop pulled out a small notebook and flipped it open. "Mr. Redman, we received a call last night from a resident claiming you've been trespassing on HOA property, harassing local teenagers, and taking inappropriate photographs of minors without consent. The caller stated you erected an illegal sign on community land and have been threatening residents who use the public trail. What do you have to say about that?" The accusation was so absurd, so completely backwards from reality that I actually laughed. Not a humorous laugh, a shocked, disbelieving sound that came out before I could stop it. "That's insane. This is my property. I have all the documentation right here." I grabbed my folder from the desk where I kept important documents and pulled out my deed and survey map. "Look, here's the property deed. Here's the official survey showing the exact boundaries. That trail runs through my land, not HOA land. I own it. And those teenagers vandalized my sign last night, so I filed a report about it." I looked at the younger officer. "You took my call. Remember, I have video footage of the whole thing." The older cop barely glanced at my paperwork. "The complaint came from Deirdre Hastings, the HOA president. She says you've been harassing her son and his friends, taking pictures of them without permission." "That's a serious allegation, Mr. Redmond. Taking photographs of minors can constitute—" I cut him off. "My patients wearing thin. They were vandalizing my property. I documented the crime as evidence. That's completely legal." The younger officer spoke up for the first time. "Mr. Redmond did call in a vandalism report last night around 8:30. I took the call myself. He mentioned teenagers damaging his property sign." The older cop shot his partner a look that clearly meant shut up and let me handle this. "Ms. Hastings was very clear in her statement. She says you put up that sign on the HOA common area, not your private land. She says the trail has been public access for over 15 years and you're trying to illegally restrict it. She also mentioned you took multiple photographs of her minor son last night, which she views as predatory behavior." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Predatory behavior. The implication was clear and disgusting. I felt my face flush hot with anger. I forced myself to stay calm and pulled out my phone. "I have video footage, multiple angles. It shows everything that happened last night. The vandalism, the confrontation, all of it. Would you like to see it?" The older officer hesitated, and I could see him recalculating. The younger one nodded. "That would be helpful, yes." I opened the app connected to my trail camera and pulled up the first video. The footage was clear and damning. 4 teenagers approaching my sign, spray painting it, drinking beer, laughing, and causing damage. The audio picked up their voices, including the threats about what the HOA president would do to me. I showed them the timestamps, the metadata, everything. Then I showed them the photos I'd taken on my phone. "See, I documented evidence of a crime on my property. Nothing more, nothing less." The younger officer watched carefully, nodding occasionally. The older one's expression didn't change much, but I could see some of the hostility draining away. Before either could respond, I heard a car door slam outside. Through the window I saw her. The HOA president stood at the end of my driveway, perfectly dressed, even at this early hour, arms crossed, and watching my house like a general surveying a battlefield. She'd followed the police here. The realization hit me like cold water. She wanted to watch this confrontation play out. She wanted to see me get arrested, or at least humiliated in front of the whole neighborhood. The older officer noticed her too and frowned slightly. "Ma'am, you need to wait in your vehicle," he called through the open door. She didn't move, just stood there, that same expression of righteous fury I'd seen when she'd first spotted my sign. The officer turned back to me, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He was weighing the evidence, my documentation versus her accusations, my calm presentation versus her aggressive complaint. Finally, he closed his notebook. "Mr. Redman, if this property is legitimately yours, as these documents suggest, then you have the right to post signage. However, I'd recommend you verify your property boundaries with the county to avoid future disputes. Ms. Hastings believes the trail is HOA property, and that's a civil matter, not criminal. As for the photographs, given the context of vandalism and your need to document evidence, I don't see criminal intent here. Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. The older officer continued, "That said, if there are any further incidents, call us immediately. Don't confront anyone yourself, and I'd strongly suggest you and Ms. Hastings work this out through proper legal channels rather than escalating." The younger officer added quietly, "Keep that video evidence safe. You might need it." They both headed toward the door, and I followed them out onto the porch. The HOA president was still standing there, and as the officers approached her, face transformed. The cold fury melted into something that looked almost like panic. "Officers, you can't just let him go. He's dangerous. He threatened my son. He's been stalking the neighborhood." Her voice had gone shrill, desperate. The older officer held up one hand. "Ma'am, Mr. Redmond has provided documentation of his property ownership and video evidence of vandalism. If you believe his property claim is incorrect, that's a civil matter you'll need to resolve through the courts. We can't arrest someone for posting a sign on their own land." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Then she pointed one trembling finger at me. "You'll regret this. The HOA has lawyers. We have resources. You think you can just move here and ignore our rules? You're going to wish you'd never bought this land." The words came out venomous, shaking with rage. The officers exchanged glances, and the younger one said, "Ms. Hastings, that sounds like a threat. I'd recommend everyone calm down and handle this through proper channels." And she turned on her heel and stormed back to her car, slamming the door hard enough that I heard it from 40 feet away. The vehicle peeled out of my driveway tires, squealing slightly on the asphalt. The older officer looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Document everything, Mr. Redmond. Every interaction, every incident. Something tells me this isn't over." He was right. Later that afternoon, a certified letter arrived from a law firm I'd never heard of. Inside was a cease and desist demand, written in dense legal language, that boiled down to one simple message: remove your sign within 7 days, or face a lawsuit for trespassing, harassment, and creating a public nuisance. I sat on my porch and read it 3 times, feeling the weight of what was coming settle onto my shoulders like a physical burden. The cease and desist letter sat on my kitchen table for 2 hours before I could bring myself to read it again. The law firm's letterhead looked impressive, embossed professional design to intimidate. The language inside was worse. 3 dense pages of legal terminology that essentially accused me of everything from trespassing to harassment to diminishing property values for the entire neighborhood. They demanded I remove my sign, cease all photography of HOA residents, and issue a written apology within 7 days. Failure to comply would result in immediate legal action, including injunctive relief and monetary damages. The whole thing was absurd, built on a foundation of lies, but it was also legitimately scary. Lawsuits cost money, even frivolous ones, even ones you win. I picked up my phone and called the only lawyer I knew personally. My friend had handled the real estate closing when I bought this place, and I trusted her judgment. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Miles, haven't heard from you in months. How's the photography business?" I skipped the pleasantries and dove straight into the situation, explaining everything that had happened over the past few days. She listened without interrupting, and I could hear her tapping keys on her keyboard as I talked. When I finished, she let out a low whistle. "Okay, first things first. This letter is weak, really weak. They cite no actual legal basis for their claims, because there isn't one. But here's the problem. HOA disputes can get expensive fast, even when you're completely in the right. We need to respond strategically." She walked me through the plan. First, hire an independent surveyor to verify my property lines one more time, creating a fresh report with current certification that would hold up in court. Second, document every single interaction with the HOA or its representatives, emails, letters, phone calls, everything. Third, compile all my evidence in an organized format that could be presented to a judge if necessary. Fourth, I would write a response letter that was professional, firm, and backed by irrefutable facts. Make it clear you're not backing down, but also show you're willing to meet face-to-face if they want to resolve this reasonably, she advised. Most bullies fold when they realize their opponent isn't scared, but Miles, be prepared for this to get uglier before it gets better. People like this HOA president They don't like losing control. I spent the next week preparing like I was setting up the most critical shoot of my career. The surveyor came out on Wednesday and spent 3 hours measuring, photographing, and documenting every inch of my property boundaries. His report came back exactly as I expected. My land extended well beyond where the trail ran, exactly as shown on my original deed. He even noted that the HOA's own archived documents from 15 years ago showed the same boundaries, meaning nothing had changed. I paid his $800 fee without hesitation. This was an investment in my future peace of mind. While waiting for the survey results, I sorted through every piece of evidence I had: video footage by date and time, photographs matched with incident reports, the cease and desist letter, copies of my property deed, everything spread across my dining table in neat stacks that grew higher each day. I hadn't realized how tightly I was gripping the pen until my hand ached from writing notes in the margins. My friend helped me draft a response letter that struck exactly the right tone: professional but unyielding. We attached copies of my deed, both survey maps and still images from my video footage showing the vandalism. The letter made 3 points crystal clear. I owned this land legally and could prove it. The teenagers had committed vandalism, which I'd reported to police, and I was happy to meet with HOA representatives to clarify the situation, but would not be removing my sign or ceasing my lawful use of my own property. We sent it certified mail with a return receipt, requested creating a paper trail that proved delivery. The satisfaction of dropping that envelope in the mailbox felt good, like I was finally fighting back instead of just defending. But life didn't stop while I prepared my defense. I still had photography clients, deadlines, bills to pay. I tried to maintain my normal routine, editing photos, responding to emails, and working in my studio. It was harder than it should have been. Every car that drove past made me tense up. Every unexpected sound had me checking my trail camera app. The stress settled into my shoulders like a weight I couldn't shake off. Sleep came in fits and starts, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios at 3 in the morning. One of my neighbors, an older woman who'd lived in the area for decades, stopped by one afternoon with fresh cookies and a sympathetic ear. "I heard what's happening with the HOA," she said quietly. "That woman has been trying to control everything around here for years. I'm glad someone finally stood up to her. Most people just give in because it's easier." Her support meant more than she probably realized. It reminded me that I wasn't fighting just for myself. I was fighting for the principle that you can't bully people off their own legally owned property. The response from the HOA's law firm came exactly 1 week later. No acknowledgement of my evidence, no suggestion of mediation, just a flat rejection of everything I'd said, and a new threat: if I didn't comply within 48 hours, they would file for an injunction. The message was clear. They weren't interested in facts or legal reality. They wanted me gone, and they were willing to drag this into court to make it happen. After hanging up, I moved fast. New cameras, new files, tighter proof. If this turned into war, I wanted every fact recorded. The single trail camera had proven its worth, but it wasn't enough anymore. I drove to an electronics store and spent the better part of an afternoon researching security camera systems, comparing specs, reading reviews on my phone while standing in the aisles. I settled on a system with 3 additional HD cameras, night vision capability, motion detection, and cloud backup. The total came to just under $1,200, money I hadn't planned to spend, but necessary insurance against whatever came next. Installing them took most of Saturday. I positioned each camera strategically using the same principles I applied to framing a photograph: angle, coverage, lighting conditions, field of view. One covered the trail entrance. Another watched the area around my sign. The third monitored the property line closest to the HOA neighborhood. All 4 cameras now created overlapping coverage with no blind spots. The technical setup was straightforward enough, but the emotional weight of what I was doing hit me as I bolted the last camera mount into place. I was fortifying my own home like it was under siege. This was supposed to be my peaceful retreat from city stress, and instead, I was installing surveillance equipment to protect myself from my own neighbors. The irony tasted bitter. I tested each camera twice, fine-tuning sensitivity and making sure every feed stored cleanly online and local. Habit made me thorough. I trusted proof, not luck. Old habits die hard. I double-checked each feed before locking up for the night. By the time I finished, the sun was setting, and my new security system was running smoothly, silently recording everything that happened on my property with timestamps accurate to the second. The escalation I'd been dreading came the following week, but not in the form I expected. Instead of more teenagers or police visits, it arrived as a mass email sent to every member of the HOA. I only knew about it because one of my neighbors, the same older woman who had brought cookies, forwarded it to me with a short message. "You need to see this. I'm so sorry." The email was from the HOA president, sent from an official HOA address, and it was devastating. The subject line read, "Safety alert concerning behavior in our community." The body of the email painted me as a dangerous individual who'd moved into the neighborhood and was now harassing residents, particularly children. It claimed I'd been photographing minors without permission, trespassing on HOA property, and making threats against community members. It advised all residents to avoid contact with me, to keep their children away from the trail area, and to report any suspicious activity to both the HOA board and local police immediately. My name was mentioned 3 times. My address was included. Everything short of posting my photo on a wanted poster. I read it 5 times, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. This wasn't just an escalation. This was a character assassination publicly distributed to dozens of families who didn't know me and had no reason to doubt their HOA president. The woman who had forwarded it added another message at the bottom. "For what it's worth, I don't believe any of this. But you should know that several people are talking. Some believe her." I saved the email immediately, adding it to my growing folder of evidence. Defamation, slander, libel. The legal terms my lawyer had mentioned suddenly felt very real and very relevant. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. This was about my reputation, my safety, my ability to live peacefully in my own home. I forwarded the email to my lawyer with a short note. "This just went out to the entire HOA. What are my options?" Her response came within an hour. "This is actionable. Clear defamation, especially since she names you specifically and makes false claims about criminal behavior. We can add this to our case. But Miles, you need to understand she's escalating because she's losing control of the narrative. That means she might do something even more drastic soon. Be careful. Document everything. Don't engage with her directly under any circumstances." The warning sat heavy in my gut. What else could she do? I'd already been accused of crimes I didn't commit, had police at my door, and received legal threats. How much worse could it get? The answer came 2 days later, when I checked my camera footage and saw her car pull up to my property line at 2 in the morning. I watched the time-stamped video with growing dread as she sat in her vehicle for nearly 10 minutes, engine running, just staring at my house in the darkness. The camera's night vision captured her face clearly through the windshield, calculating angry, planning something. Then she drove away. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Instead, I sat on my porch with my phone in hand, watching the live camera feeds, waiting for whatever she had planned. The footage of her late-night surveillance went straight into my evidence folder, backed up 3 times, timestamp preserved. Every interaction, every threat, every piece of evidence is carefully documented and organized. My lawyer had been right about one thing: this was getting uglier. But I was ready. I'd spent my entire career learning to see details others missed, to capture moments that told a complete story, to present truth through careful documentation. Now I was applying those same skills to protecting everything I'd worked for. And I wasn't going to stop until the whole truth came to light. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and unseasonably warm weather for late autumn. I woke early, made coffee, and stepped out onto my porch with my camera to catch the golden hour light filtering through the oak trees. For a moment, everything felt normal again, just me, my coffee, and the peaceful landscape that had drawn me to this property in the first place. Then I looked toward the trail and my stomach dropped. The sign was gone. Not just vandalized this time, gone. Only the concrete post remained jutting up from the ground like a broken tooth. I set down my coffee and walked toward it, already knowing what I'd find, but needing to see it anyway. The sign lay cracked and filthy in the tall grass, my painted words drowned in mud and boot marks, the work of rage, deliberate and mean. I didn't need to guess who. I pulled out my phone and accessed my camera system, scrolling back through the night's footage. There, 2:30 in the morning, a familiar SUV pulled up to the property line with its headlights off. The driver's side door opened, and the HOA president stepped out, dressed in dark clothing, with a hood pulled up, a laughable attempt at disguise that did nothing to hide her face from my night vision cameras. She looked around nervously, checking for witnesses, then walked directly to my sign with a claw hammer in her hand. The footage was crystal clear. She gripped the sign with both hands and wrenched it back and forth until the wood cracked. When that didn't fully break it, she used the hammer, striking it repeatedly with vicious, angry blows that spoke to something deeper than just a property dispute. This was personal. This was rage. The audio picked up her muttering to herself between strikes. "Let's see you try now, you bastard. Think you can ignore me. Think you can embarrass me in front of the whole neighborhood." I watched the entire 3-minute video twice, making sure I had every detail memorized. She destroyed my sign, kicked the pieces into the grass, then stood there breathing hard, staring directly at one of my cameras. For a moment, I thought she'd seen it, but no. She was just looking in that general direction, probably at my dark house, imagining me asleep and unaware. She had no idea she'd just handed me the evidence I needed. I downloaded the footage immediately and sent copies to 3 different locations, then called the non-emergency police line. The same dispatcher from before answered and recognized my voice. "Let me guess," she said with a sigh. "More vandalism." I confirmed and gave her the details. She promised to send an officer within the hour. While I waited, I photographed the destroyed sign from multiple angles, professional documentation showing the extent of the damage. The officer who arrived was the younger one, who'd been sympathetic during my last police encounter. He watched the video footage on my phone, shaking his head slowly. "That's pretty clear-cut criminal mischief. Probably criminal trespassing too, since she came onto your property to commit the vandalism. I'll file a report and we'll issue a citation." He took down all the information, asked me to email him the video file, and headed to the HOA president's house to serve the citation. I watched him drive away, feeling a grim satisfaction. Finally, consequences. Finally, someone in authority acknowledged that what she was doing was illegal, but that satisfaction was short-lived. Within hours, I received notification that the HOA had filed for an emergency injunction in county court, claiming I was harassing and threatening HOA members and needed to be legally restrained from interfering with community activities. The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday, less than a week away. My lawyer called me that afternoon, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They're doubling down. The injunction filing is full of lies, claims you've been stalking board members, interfering with HOA meetings you never attended, making threats you never made. But we have to take this seriously. If a judge grants even a temporary injunction, it could restrict your use of your own property." Tuesday arrived faster than I wanted. The county courthouse was a squat brick building downtown, and I met my lawyer in the parking lot 30 minutes before our hearing time. She briefed me quickly on what to expect. "Let me do most of the talking. If the judge asks you direct questions, answer clearly and briefly. Don't let them provoke you into anger. We have the evidence on our side." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with barely a dozen seats for observers. The HOA president sat on the opposite side with her lawyer, an older man in an expensive suit who kept shuffling papers like he was searching for something he'd lost. Several HOA board members filled the front row, presumably there to support their president. She wouldn't look at me, keeping her eyes fixed straight ahead, but I could see tension in her shoulders and the way her hands gripped her purse. The judge entered and we all stood. He was probably in his 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of face that had seen every variety of human stupidity multiple times over. He skimmed through the paperwork, then looked up over his reading glasses. "All right, let's make this quick. I've read the filings. Ms. Hastings, your attorney claims Mr. Redmond has been harassing HOA members and trespassing on community property. What evidence do you have?" Her lawyer stood and presented their case, a recitation of the same accusations from the cease and desist letter, plus new claims about me following board members and making threatening phone calls. All lies, all completely fabricated. When he finished, the judge turned to my lawyer. Response. She stood calmly and pulled out a tablet. "Your Honor, I have video evidence that contradicts every claim made by the petitioner. In fact, the evidence shows Ms. Hastings herself committed criminal vandalism on my client's property just 5 days ago." She played the footage on the courtroom's display screen. The video of the HOA president destroying my sign played in complete silence, her face clearly visible, her actions deliberate and unmistakable. The judge watched without expression until the video ended. Then he turned to the HOA president and his voice went cold. "Ms. Hastings, This video clearly shows you vandalizing Mr. Redmond's property in the middle of the night. Why exactly should I grant you an injunction against him?" Her face had gone pale, then flushed deep red. She stammered something about self-defense, about protecting the community, about me being a threat. The judge held up one hand. "I've heard enough. Petition for injunction denied, Ms. Hastings. If Mr. Redmond's property deed and survey are accurate, and I see no reason to doubt them based on what's been presented, then he has every right to maintain his land as he sees fit. If you believe there's a legitimate property dispute, file a proper civil suit with evidence, but stop destroying his property. Do I make myself clear?" She nodded, unable to speak. The judge looked at me. "Mr. Redmond, you're free to continue using your property legally. I'd recommend both parties avoid further contact if possible." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that felt like victory. The injunction denial should have been the end of it. A reasonable person would have accepted the judge's ruling and moved on. But the HOA president wasn't reasonable, and she wasn't done. 1 month after the courthouse humiliation, my lawyer called with news that made my blood run cold. They've filed a full civil lawsuit, trespassing, nuisance, diminution of property values. They're asking for $150,000 in damages. I sat down hard on my porch steps, the phone pressed to my ear. On what grounds? The judge already said I own the property. My lawyer's voice was grim. "That's the thing, Miles. They've attached a survey map to their complaint, but it's not the same map we've been working with. This one shows the property line in a completely different location, putting your land inside HOA boundaries by about 15 feet. The implications hit me immediately. If their map was accepted as legitimate, everything changed. My property would suddenly overlap with the HOA common area. My sign would be on their land. Everything I'd been fighting for would collapse." "That's impossible," I said. "My deed is clear. The independent survey confirmed it. Where did they get this other map?" She paused. "That's what we need to find out, because if they fabricated evidence, this goes from a civil dispute to potential criminal fraud." Discovery began. My lawyer hit back hard, demanding every original map and deed. The judge allowed them 14 days, no stalling, no excuses. While we waited, something unexpected happened. I received an email from an address I didn't recognize clearly, a throwaway account created just for this message. The subject line read, "You deserve to know the truth." My hand hovered over the delete button. It could be spam or worse, some kind of trap. But something made me open it. The message was short, "Mr. Redmond, I'm a member of the HOA board. What our president has done is wrong. The survey map she submitted to the court was altered. I'm attaching a scan of the original map from our archives. It matches your property deed exactly. She changed it to try to win the lawsuit. I can't come forward publicly without losing my home and my position, but you deserve to have this evidence. I hope it helps." Attached was a PDF, a survey map dated 15 years earlier, showing property boundaries that aligned perfectly with my deed. My land was clearly outside HOA jurisdiction. No overlap, no ambiguity. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. I forwarded the email to my lawyer immediately, then called her. "We need to verify this is authentic," she said, her voice sharp with excitement. "If it is, and if we can prove the map they submitted was altered, this whole case flips on its head." She hired a digital forensics expert, someone with a PhD who testified in court cases regularly. He analyzed both maps, the original from the whistleblower and the one submitted in the lawsuit. His report came back 3 days later, and it was damning. The original survey showed clear metadata from 2008, created with professional surveying software unmodified since creation. The altered map showed metadata from just 2 months ago, created in Photoshop, with clear evidence of digital manipulation. Someone had taken the original file, imported it into photo editing software, and moved the property line 15 feet. The changes were sophisticated enough that a casual observer wouldn't notice, but under forensic analysis they were obvious. The expert could even identify which layers had been modified and when. My lawyer scheduled a deposition with the HOA president, and I attended, as was my right. Watching her squirm under questioning was surreal. My lawyer presented both maps side by side on a large screen. "Ms. Hastings, can you explain why the survey map you submitted to the court differs from the original HOA survey map from 15 years ago?" The president's face went through several shades of pale. I I trusted our lawyer to handle the documentation. I don't know anything about survey maps. My lawyer didn't let up. But you signed the certification attached to this map, stating under penalty of perjury that it was accurate. Are you saying you signed a legal document without reviewing it? The woman's lawyer put his hand on her arm, whispering frantically. She pulled away from him. I was protecting our community. That man has no right to block our trail. We've used that path for years. It wasn't an answer to the question, but it was an admission of something worse, that she believed her authority superseded property law, that her feelings about the situation mattered more than legal boundaries. The deposition ended with her in tears, her lawyer looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and my lawyer with a satisfied smile she didn't bother hiding. 2 days later, the HOA's lawyer called my lawyer privately and admitted he hadn't known about the altered map. My client provided it to me and claimed it was the official HOA document. I didn't verify it independently, which was malpractice on my part. I'm withdrawing from this case immediately. I want no part of document fraud. My lawyer filed a motion with the court, presenting the forensic evidence of the forgery, and requesting the judge refer the matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. When we returned to court, the atmosphere was completely different. The judge had clearly read our motion and the forensic report, and his expression was thunderous. Ms. Hastings, this evidence suggests you or someone acting on your behalf submitted a fraudulent document to this court. That is a serious crime. I'm dismissing the HOA's lawsuit with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation into possible forgery and perjury charges. Mr. Redmond, you may file a countersuit for damages if you choose. The HOA president stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The judge continued, I also suggest, Ms. Hastings, that you retain a criminal defense attorney. You're going to need one. 3 months after the judge's referral, the district attorney's office completed their investigation. The charges came down exactly as my lawyer had predicted: forgery, perjury, and criminal mischief. All felonies. The HOA president's son faced separate charges for vandalism, though as a juvenile, his case would be handled differently. I watched the arraignment from the back of the courtroom, not out of vindictiveness, but because I needed to see this through to the end. She stood before the judge in a black suit, her lawyer beside her, and pleaded not guilty. But everyone in that room knew the evidence was overwhelming. The forensic report, the video footage of her destroying my sign, the whistleblower testimony from the board member who'd finally come forward publicly. There was no defense that could explain away digital metadata and time-stamped video. The criminal proceedings moved slowly, but my civil case moved faster. I filed a countersuit against both the HOA president personally and the HOA itself for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, vandalism costs, and legal fees. The numbers added up quickly between attorney fees, the surveyor, the security system lost photography income from the stress and distraction, and punitive damages for the slander campaign. I asked for $150,000, the same amount they'd tried to extract from me. The HOA's insurance company refused to cover the claim, citing the president's willful and malicious actions. That left the organization itself exposed along with her personal assets. Within 2 weeks, the new HOA board president, a reasonable woman who'd voted against the lawsuit from the beginning, reached out to my lawyer requesting a settlement meeting. We met in a conference room at my lawyer's office. The new president brought 2 other board members, both of whom looked genuinely embarrassed about the whole situation. She opened with an apology that sounded sincere. Mr. Redmond, the board wants you to know that the previous president acted without full board approval on many of these matters. We've since discovered she had been making decisions unilaterally and misleading us about the legal situation. We're prepared to offer a settlement of $50,000, a public apology to be sent to all HOA members, and a permanent guarantee that we will never interfere with your property rights. We'd also like to contribute to trail maintenance near your land as a gesture of goodwill. I looked at my lawyer, who gave a slight nod. We'd discussed this possibility. Dragging the HOA through a full trial would bankrupt the organization and hurt innocent homeowners who'd had nothing to do with the harassment. I'll accept, I said, on 3 conditions. First, the former president is permanently banned from all HOA activities and meetings. Second, the public apology must specifically retract all accusations made against me, including the claims about photographing children. Third, the HOA installs a small plaque near the trail entrance acknowledging this land is private property but open for community use with my permission. They agreed to everything. The settlement was signed within a week. The apology email went out to every HOA member, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe normally. Several neighbors stopped by to apologize personally, bringing baked goods and kind words. The older woman who'd supported me from the beginning cried when she hugged me. "You did what my son couldn't do years ago when the HOA drove him out of his home," she said. "You stood up to them and won." The criminal trial took place 6 months after the charges were filed. I attended as a witness, testifying about the vandalism, the harassment, and the impact on my life. The forensic expert presented his findings about the altered survey map. The whistleblower, no longer anonymous, explained how the president had pressured board members and made threats to maintain control. The prosecutor presented emails showing she'd personally directed the map alteration, thinking she could get away with it. The defense tried to paint her as a concerned community leader who'd made mistakes under stress, but the jury wasn't buying it. They deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. At sentencing, the judge was thorough and uncompromising. "Ms. Hastings, you held a position of trust in your community, and you abused that trust systematically. You fabricated evidence, lied to law enforcement, destroyed property, and attempted to defraud the court. This kind of behavior corrodes the foundation of civil society." The sentence was tough but not devastating. 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, $2,000 in fines, $10,000 in restitution to me, and a 10-year ban from serving on any HOA board. She would avoid prison but carry a felony record. Her son received probation and community service for his role in the vandalism. The social consequences were harsher than the legal ones. The former president became a pariah in the neighborhood. People crossed the street to avoid her. She stopped appearing at community events. I heard through the grapevine that her marriage was strained, that her son had transferred schools to escape the stigma. Part of me wondered if the punishment had gone too far, if public humiliation added to legal consequences was excessive. But then I'd remember the sleepless nights, the anxiety every time a car drove past my house, the damage to my reputation that could have destroyed my business. She had tried to paint me as a predator, to turn an entire community against me based on lies. The consequences she faced were the natural result of her own choices, her own actions, her own refusal to accept that she didn't control everything and everyone around her. I didn't take pleasure in her suffering, but I didn't feel guilty either. She'd made her choices. 1 year after everything began, the neighborhood held a small celebration near the trail. The HOA had followed through on their promise, adding benches, trash cans, and proper maintenance. My plaque was installed, a simple bronze marker reading, "In honor of truth, justice, and community, may we always choose the right path." I stood with my camera photographing families walking the trail, children playing, people enjoying the space peacefully. The trail had become what I'd always imagined it could be, a shared resource properly maintained, respected by everyone who used it. The irony wasn't lost on me. What the former president had fought so hard to control through intimidation and lies had eventually come to pass through cooperation and respect. If she'd simply approached me as a reasonable person from the beginning and asked politely about trail access, we could have reached an agreement without any conflict. Instead, her need for dominance and control had destroyed her reputation and cost her everything. Neighbors began waving again when they passed by, small gestures that once felt impossible. The air around the trail felt lighter, like the tension that had haunted us had finally burned off. Even the silence seemed kinder now, carrying the sound of normal life instead of suspicion. My photography business flourished. Several people hired me specifically because they had heard about my fight with the HOA, impressed by my persistence and documentation skills. I even started consulting pro bono for other homeowners facing similar disputes, teaching them how to document evidence and organize their defense. My story spread through local news and community forums, becoming a cautionary tale about HOA overreach and the importance of standing up for your rights. Some called me a hero. I didn't feel like one. I'd just been a man trying to protect his property, using the tools available to him, patience, documentation, and the legal system. But if my experience helped others avoid similar harassment, then maybe the whole nightmare had been worth it. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold, I thought about everything I'd learned. Justice took its time, but it came. Truth outlasted every lie. The trail lay quiet now, my land, my rules, and finally peace. Sometimes I still get letters. Strangers from other towns, people tangled in their own neighborhood disputes, thanking me for showing that one person can stand up to a system and win. A retired teacher wrote that my case gave her courage to challenge an unjust fine from her HOA. Another man sent photos of his rebuilt fence saying he'd used my court filings as a model for his own defense. I never asked for any of it, but reading their words reminded me why I'd fought so hard in the first place. On weekends, I started hosting small workshops at the local community center. Nothing fancy, just coffee-printed guides and honest talk about how to protect your rights without losing your mind. The same camera that once recorded vandalism now captured faces of neighbors learning to trust themselves again. The trail behind my house became a quiet symbol of all that. Sometimes I'd see families walking it, unaware of what it had cost to keep it open and free. I didn't stop them. That's the point. Freedom doesn't need fences. It just needs people willing to defend it when it's challenged.
Thanks for watching QA Stories. Share this video with someone who loves a good plot twist. And don't forget to subscribe.